What's in a name? After all, a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet, but what about the other way around? Especially when it comes to professional wrestling. Because when it comes to pro wrestling and nicknames, there are a lot that tend to repeat, especially considering that there are only so many to go around. And that's the subject of this episode. Because today, a quick shout out to all of my awesome Patreon supporters such as Baba Yaga, Caleb Robinson, and Jeff Ang. Thank you so much for the support, it really does mean a lot. Out of all of the many years of pro wrestling's existence, it's not surprising that there are only so many really cool sounding nicknames for a wrestler to choose from, and that some of them have definitely repeated. Now, this video is just a small sampling of the many times that this has happened, so if you could think of some others, let me know down in the comments. And while you're at it, if you could please make sure that you're subscribed to this channel as a member of the Know It All Nation, and if you could, please give this video a like, it really does help. Anyway, with that being said, let's get into the list. We start this list off with an obvious one: Don "The Rock" Morocco and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or The Rock Rocky Maivia, depending on which of these names you'd rather go with. Anyway, this all began in November of 1987, where Don Morocco officially turned babyface by rescuing superstar Billy Graham, who was being attacked by Slick, One Man Gang, and Butch Reed. After that, he would take on Billy Graham as his new manager, and he would push aside his old moniker of the Magnificent Morocco in favor of being called The Rock. Then, almost a decade later, and one Dwayne Johnson would make his debut in the WWF, and to pay homage to both his father and his grandfather, he would go by the name The Rock Rocky Maivia, and the WWF would go back to referring to Don Morocco as the Magnificent Morocco, and make it seem like the Rock nickname was something invented just for Dwayne. And of course, there is still yet another name that Dwayne Johnson shares with another wrestler. Not only did he borrow the name The Rock as well as Rocky and Maivia, but in addition to this, he also has the moniker of the People's Champion, which he also shares with DDP. What better way is there to show respect for your favorite wrestler of all time than by naming your girlfriend after him? That wouldn't be my first thought of something to do, but hey, that's macho for you. Anyway, Randy Savage first met Stephanie Bellers in Tampa Bay, Florida. She first appeared on WCW TV on December 28, 1998 on an episode of Monday Nitro. At first, she would go sans nombre, but then at Spring Stampede 1999, she would debut under her new name, Gorgeous George, which was obviously paying homage to Gorgeous George the wrestler, an obvious influence to many professional wrestlers, including one Macho Man Randy Savage, who also would come out to the song Pomp and Circumstance, which is the same song that Gorgeous George would come out to as well. Speaking of Gorgeous George, another wrestler that owes a lot to the OG of Grand Heels would be Ray Stevens, who entered the main event scene thanks to his feud with Gorgeous George way back in the 50s. Now originally, Ray Stevens was known as the Blonde Bomber due to his hair color and his bombs away knee drop. But then, in the early 1970s, Stevens would use that exact same knee drop to Dr. X, while his leg was stuck in the ropes. This resulted in the kayfabe breaking of Dr. X's leg, and Stevens now going by the name the Crippler. Then, over 2 decades later, and this piece of nomenclature would repeat yet again, but this time it would be Chris Benoit, who would pick up the nickname during the mid-90s, while he was working for both ECW and doing tours in Japan. He was booked as a dominant wrestler, and the nickname would become official after he put Rocco Rock on the sidelines. Ernest the Cat Miller of World Championship Wrestling fame also paid tribute to one of his favorite wrestlers, the Big Cat Ernie Ladd, but apparently you don't need to be named Ernest in order to pick up this feline nickname, as Stacey Carter, who debuted as Miss Kitty in the WWF, would take on the more grown-up nickname of The Cat after winning the WWF Women's Championship at the Armageddon pay-per-view in December of 1999. Now yes, I am aware that both of them don't spell the name the same way, but nevertheless, I do find it interesting that both of them took on the moniker during the late 90s, especially considering that a lot of other entries on this list happened years or even decades apart from each other. Larry Hennig, the father of Mr. Perfect and the grandfather of Curtis Axel, was a very powerful man indeed. He was given the nickname The Axe in the 1970s after turning babyface and in reference to his powerful elbow drop that he used to do to his opponents. And in fact, as Paul Heyman pointed out, the name Curtis Axel is in reference to Larry the Axe. But Curtis isn't the only one who has something in common with Larry. Although, instead of adding an L like Joe Hennig did, he would actually be removing an E, as this member of Demolition would be going by the name of Axe, which is just spelled AX, instead of the AXE that Larry used. Oh, and also, I took particular note that back then, WWF and Demolition decided to get the E out, which is the opposite of what normally happens. The Beast from the East, Bam Bam Bigelow, is easily one of the most recognized names in all of professional wrestling, with his flame tattoos on his head alone being enough to make him one of the biggest names in all of professional wrestling. But speaking of names, it's pretty interesting because the name Bam Bam is also used by another wrestler, Terry Bam Bam Gordy, who was the major powerhouse of the Fabulous Freebirds. But unlike some of the other contested nicknames on this list, these two Bam Bams did get to go against each other, most notably at the ECW event Ultimate Jeopardy in 1996, in a match that was billed as the Battle of the Bam Bams, which Bigelow was victorious. Oh, and in another bonus entry, Bam Bam Bigelow also used to go by the name Crusher Bam Bam Bigelow in Japan. But he wasn't the only one, because there's another wrestler in Japan who goes by the name Crusher Bam Bam Harai. Next up, we have yet another obvious one, the name of The Nature Boy. Now originally, this nickname belonged to the OG Buddy Rogers, who was the WWE's first ever champion. But while he won that title in the 1960s and retired soon thereafter, the following decade in the 1970s and one Ric Flair would start taking on the name The Nature Boy, as well as several other aspects of Buddy Rogers' gimmick. Now, within a short amount of time, Flair became so successful at this that of course other imitators would follow suit, as Buddy Landel would take on the nickname in the 1980s along with the blonde hair and flashy robes. But of course, with all that being said, most of this was still to no avail, as to this day when people think of the Nature Boy, they think of Ric Flair. The name Kane is pretty common in professional wrestling, but of course, when we hear it, we all think of the Big Red Machine, although not everyone remembers that his big brother is actually the first one to use the nickname, albeit very briefly. However, these two brothers with the exact same name is not the focus of this entry. Instead, that goes to another famous wrestling sibling, Stevie Ray, whose name was in reference to both Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles. But originally, while given this nickname before he ever joined WCW, once him and his brother signed up with the company, they were repackaged as a tag team called Harlem Heat. And initially speaking, his brother Booker T was known as Cole, and Stevie Ray was going by the name of Kane. And yes, in case you were wondering, Stevie Ray had the name first. Long before John Cena was making record numbers for WWE and achieving superstar status, the moniker of The Franchise was one that belonged to an elite group of wrestlers, who proved to be one of the most important wrestlers that a particular company has. Now, for World Championship Wrestling, this of course went to the man they call Sting. But let's not forget that this was also a title once used by ECW's Shane Douglas, in reference to him being the face of Extreme Championship Wrestling. And out of the three of them, Shane Douglas is the only one who had Francine as a manager, so he does have that over everybody else. And our final entry on this list is another three-way share, as Dave Bautista, who has gone by many different nicknames such as Leviathan and Deacon Bautista, also went by the nickname of The Animal. But he's not the only one, because let's also remember that a member of Legion of Doom also went by the nickname of Animal, Road Warrior Animal to be exact. But we're still not done yet, as there is still another Animal, George the Animal Steel. Hey, who knows, maybe Vince McMahon is just a big fan of the Muppets. Oh, and speaking of the word big, that would probably be the most common nickname in WWE, but I definitely don't have time to cover all of those. Anyway, there you go. 10 wrestlers who have shared nicknames, but what are some others that you can think of? Let me know down in the comments, and please give this video a like and make sure that you're subscribed to this channel. Oh, and also a big thank you to all of my awesome Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.